Prince Harry wants that Freedom Flight video deleted from the internet, Lady Colin Campbell. He says we should never see it again. We should just pretend that he never made all of these ludicrous claims. You know what? Why don't we just play it once more then, Lady C, to really annoy him? Watch.
I am on the 14th of March, and we are on a Freedom Flight. We are leaving Canada, and we are headed to Los Angeles. Grandma's here. Hi, Grandma. Bruce here, with a ball in her mouth.
Why don't you say hi? You're about to go where Mommy's from.
So busy with the current situation, thanks to another amazing friend who we've never met, but who believes in us.
Just days after the palace tried projecting unity to the world, Prince Harry reportedly made a move that has royal insiders whispering one explosive question. What exactly is he trying to erase? Because according to growing speculation, a forgotten recording, a hidden family truth, and Princess Diana's own unheard words may be about to expose far more than anyone inside Buckingham Palace ever wanted revealed. For years, Prince Harry has built his post-royal identity around one powerful message, that leaving the monarchy was not betrayal, not rebellion, but survival. He has repeated it in interviews, documentaries, memoirs, and public appearances across the world. The institution was too controlling. The pressure was too intense. The system, according to Harry, had become impossible to live inside. And for millions watching from the outside, that narrative felt emotionally real. It felt personal. It felt believable. But now, according to royal insiders and growing media speculation, a piece of Harry's own past may be creating a problem his current story cannot easily explain. The footage in question is now being referred to by royal commentators as the Freedom Flight recording. March 14, 2020. Harry boards a private plane, leaving Canada for Los Angeles, with Meghan beside him, their dog nearby, and a tone in his voice that many now say sounded less like transition and more like escape. In the recording, Harry reportedly describes the journey as a freedom flight, not a relocation, not a fresh start. Freedom. And according to palace watchers, that single phrase may now be coming back to haunt him. Because here's where the contradiction begins. In recent appearances, Harry has continued insisting that he will always remain part of the royal family, that he is still doing exactly what he was born to do. It is a very different message from the man who once appeared to describe the monarchy as something he needed to escape. And according to royal analysts, both statements now exist side by side in the permanent public record, one suggesting liberation from a prison, the other suggesting lifelong loyalty to the same institution. That contradiction alone would be enough to trigger headlines. But according to insiders, the timing could not be worse for Harry, because another royal bombshell is now approaching, one that may strike far deeper than a forgotten video. Princess Diana's private recordings. 5 full hours reportedly recorded back in 1991, most of which the public has never heard. And according to reports, those tapes are scheduled for release in 2027, timed with the 30th anniversary of Diana's death. And that is where palace anxiety reportedly turns into genuine concern. Because Harry's entire post-royal narrative has often leaned heavily on one emotional foundation, Diana. Her pain, her isolation, her struggle against the institution, her tragic ending. Harry has repeatedly implied that history was repeating itself, that Meghan faced the same dangers Diana once faced, and that leaving the monarchy was his way of protecting his family before history repeated itself again. But according to royal commentators and those close to Diana's history, these unheard recordings may present a version of Diana the public never fully knew.
Well, it was a bold statement of the fact that he had been imprisoned, that he had been born into a prison, that he had been brought up in a prison, and that under Meghan's ministrations and her enlightenment, he had managed to escape from the prison.
Not simply vulnerable, not simply victimized, but strategic, tactical, emotionally intelligent. A woman who understood media narratives, understood power, and, according to some reports, may have used public sympathy as part of a larger plan to reshape her own future. And if that version of Diana is what the recordings reveal, then Harry's modern narrative could suddenly face its biggest challenge yet. Because if Diana did not see herself as trapped, if Diana saw herself as actively shaping her own escape, then one of the emotional pillars supporting Harry's departure story may become far more complicated than the world has been led to believe. And according to growing palace speculation, that may be exactly why old footage, old interviews, and old records are suddenly becoming so important again. And what makes this even more explosive is that this may only be the beginning. But if you think the Freedom Flight video is the real story here, palace insiders say you are looking at only half the picture. Because according to growing speculation, the video itself is not what has people inside royal circles paying attention. It is what that video becomes when placed beside everything Prince Harry has said since. And when those pieces are lined up side by side, some royal commentators believe the cracks in the narrative become impossible to ignore. March 2020 was supposed to be the beginning of Harry's new life. No palace schedules. No royal protocols. No military patronages. No endless lines of photographers waiting outside every event. For the first time in his life, Harry appeared to be stepping completely outside the institution that had shaped him since birth. And in that now widely discussed recording, he reportedly described the journey to Los Angeles as a freedom flight, a phrase that, according to analysts, carried far more emotional weight than many people realized at the time. Freedom from what? That is the question royal watchers are now asking all over again. Because if Harry genuinely saw the monarchy as something he needed freedom from, if he truly believed he was escaping a system that had trapped him his entire life, then why, just a few years later, is he now publicly insisting that he will always remain part of the royal family, that he is still doing exactly what he was born to do? According to royal commentators, those two messages do not naturally fit together. One sounds like escape. The other sounds like loyalty. One sounds like rejection. The other sounds like inheritance. And according to palace insiders, that contradiction may be creating serious problems behind closed doors. Some reports now claim that discussions have quietly emerged about the growing importance of what commentators are calling the permanent record. Not interviews. Not press releases. Not carefully prepared statements. The permanent record means raw footage, old speeches, archived clips, public moments captured before media teams had time to reshape the message. And according to insiders, Harry's Freedom Flight video may now be one of the most powerful examples of that. Because in that moment, according to royal analysts, Harry was not speaking as a strategist. He was speaking as someone who believed he had finally escaped. And that is exactly why some commentators believe the video carries so much weight today. It was not filtered through lawyers. It was not polished by publicists. It was not delivered from a stage or a podcast studio. It was spontaneous, emotional, immediate, and that, according to royal insiders, makes it incredibly difficult to explain away now that Harry's public messaging has evolved into something very different. But just when you think that contradiction is explosive enough, another development reportedly threatens to make the situation far more complicated. Princess Diana. Because according to multiple reports, 5 full hours of Diana's private recordings, most of them never publicly released, are scheduled to emerge in 2027. And according to royal commentators who have followed the story closely, those recordings may contain something Harry never expected the public to hear. Not simply Diana's pain, not simply her heartbreak, but Diana's strategy, her planning, her awareness of exactly how public sympathy, media pressure, and institutional timing could be used to reshape her future. And if that turns out to be true, everything changes. Because Harry's post-royal story has repeatedly leaned on one deeply emotional comparison, that he left because he refused to let history repeat itself, that he saw Meghan facing the same dangers his mother once faced, that he was protecting his family from the same system that destroyed Diana. Millions believed that. Many still do. But according to palace speculation, if Diana's own private words reveal a far more tactical, far more self-directed version of her story, then Harry's emotional foundation may suddenly look far more complicated than the world was originally told. And according to insiders, that may be exactly why old videos, forgotten recordings, and permanent records suddenly matter more than ever. Because statements can change, interviews can be reinterpreted, public relations can evolve, but the permanent record never changes. And what Prince Harry said on that plane in 2020 may now become one of the most important pieces of evidence in a story that is only getting darker. Because if the Freedom Flight exposed how Harry felt in that moment, what Diana's unheard recordings may reveal could change how the world sees his entire story forever. But according to royal insiders, the real shock may not come from Prince Harry at all. It may come from the one person whose memory has protected his story for years. Diana, Princess of Wales. Because if the private recording scheduled for release in 2027 reveal a version of Diana very different from the one the world has held onto for nearly 3 decades, then this stops being a story about Harry's contradictions and becomes a story about whether the entire emotional foundation behind his departure was built on an incomplete picture. For years, Harry has spoken about his mother as both inspiration and warning. In interviews, documentaries, public speeches, and even in his memoir, he repeatedly returned to one central idea, that he saw history beginning to repeat itself. He saw media pressure building. He saw public attacks growing louder. He saw Meghan facing what he believed Diana once faced. And according to Harry, leaving the monarchy was not a luxury. It was a necessity. It was protection. It was survival. For millions watching around the world, that message felt deeply personal. It felt impossible to argue against because it was rooted in one of the most painful stories in modern royal history. But now, according to commentators close to royal history, those upcoming Diana recordings may introduce a version of events that is far more complicated. Reports claim the tapes were originally recorded in 1991, years before Diana's death, years before some of the most public chapters of her marriage to King Charles III became global headlines, and years before the world fully understood how deeply fractured the marriage had already become. 5 hours of private recordings. Most never publicly heard. And according to those who claim to understand their contents, Diana may emerge not simply as vulnerable, but strategic. That single possibility has palace watchers paying very close attention. Because for decades, the public narrative around Diana has often centered on pain, betrayal, isolation, and victimhood. A young woman trapped inside an institution she never fully understood. A princess crushed by duty, public scrutiny, and a marriage already shadowed by another relationship. It became one of the most emotionally powerful narratives in royal history. And it remains deeply embedded in how millions still view the monarchy today. But according to royal commentators now discussing these tapes, the recordings may reveal something different. They may show Diana as highly aware of media influence, highly aware of public sympathy, highly aware of timing, perception, and the power of controlling her own story. Some reports even suggest Diana may have openly discussed using public narratives as part of a larger strategy to create freedom on her own terms rather than simply escaping a system that was destroying her. And if that turns out to be true, everything changes. Because Harry's entire post-royal message has often depended on one emotional comparison, that he was following his mother's path, that he was doing what Diana never got the chance to finish, that by leaving with Meghan Markle, he was protecting his family from the same institutional pressures that eventually consumed Diana. That comparison has been one of the most powerful parts of Harry's public identity since stepping away from royal life. But what happens if Diana herself tells a more complicated story? What happens if the recordings reveal agency instead of helplessness? Strategy instead of pure persecution? Calculation instead of complete emotional collapse? According to palace insiders, that possibility is exactly why so many people inside royal circles are watching this situation so closely. Because if Diana's own private words complicate the image Harry has relied on for years, then critics may begin asking an uncomfortable question. Did Harry inherit his mother's pain, or only the version of her story that best supported his own departure? And that question becomes even more uncomfortable when placed beside the Freedom Flight video. One archived moment shows Harry appearing to celebrate escape. Another public statement shows him insisting he still belongs to the institution. And now a third piece of the puzzle may be coming. Diana's own voice, untouched by interviews, untouched by headlines, untouched by decades of retelling. Just her.
Raw.
Unfiltered.
Permanent.
And according to royal observers, if those three pieces fail to tell the same story, then what happens next may not simply challenge Harry's narrative. It may force the world to completely rethink one of the most emotionally powerful stories the modern monarchy has ever produced. But according to palace insiders, the story becomes even more uncomfortable when you realize this may not simply be about Prince Harry or even about Diana, Princess of Wales. Because behind the headlines, behind the documentaries, behind the emotional interviews and carefully timed magazine covers, another battle may already be unfolding. A battle over who controls the royal narrative in the digital age and who the public chooses to believe when the permanent record starts speaking louder than public relations ever could. For years, Harry and Meghan Markle appeared to master something few royals had ever truly understood: modern narrative control. Streaming platforms, primetime interviews, podcasts, magazine exclusives, carefully selected photographs, emotional storytelling, strategic timing. Every appearance seemed designed to reinforce one central message: two people who walked away from power, privilege, and tradition in order to protect their family, their mental health, and their future. And for a while, it worked. Millions listened. Millions sympathized. Millions believed. But according to royal commentators, the challenge with building a public identity around emotional storytelling is simple. Every story eventually runs into evidence. And when archived footage, old interviews, forgotten statements, and untouched records start resurfacing, the public begins asking dangerous questions. Questions public relations teams cannot easily answer. Questions interviews cannot fully control. Questions that live forever once they enter what royal analysts are now calling the permanent record. That is exactly why the Freedom Flight footage has suddenly become so significant. Because according to commentators, it was never meant to become a symbol. It was just a moment. A private transition becoming public by accident. A man boarding a plane, leaving one life behind, beginning another. But in that moment, Harry reportedly used a phrase that now carries enormous weight: freedom flight. And for many royal watchers, that phrase was not symbolic. It was honest. It was emotional. It was unfiltered. And that makes it incredibly powerful today. Because when that same man later appears on global stages saying he will always remain part of the royal family, saying he is still doing what he was born to do, the public cannot help comparing the two versions. One, Harry, sounds liberated. The other sounds loyal. One sounds like escape. The other sounds like belonging. And according to insiders, that contradiction may be growing harder to manage with every passing year. But while Harry's archived words are already raising eyebrows, some commentators believe the real earthquake may come from something far bigger: the scheduled release of Diana's unheard recordings in 2027. And according to those close to royal history, these tapes could become one of the most important archival releases in modern monarchy history. 5 hours. Private conversations. No television cameras. No interview hosts. No edited soundbites. Just Diana speaking in her own words years before her death. And that matters because for nearly 3 decades, Diana's public story has shaped how entire generations understand the royal family. She was the wounded princess, the isolated mother, the betrayed wife, the woman the institution failed. That narrative became global truth. It shaped documentaries. It shaped biographies. It shaped how millions eventually understood Harry himself. But according to royal commentators and longtime palace observers, the upcoming recordings may reveal a woman who is far more politically aware than the public ever realized. A woman who understood media cycles. A woman who understood timing. A woman who understood how public sympathy could become leverage. And if those recordings truly show Diana as tactical, strategic, and actively shaping her own exit from royal life, then one of the emotional foundations supporting Harry's current story may suddenly become far more complicated. And that is where the palace reportedly becomes deeply interested. Because if Harry's freedom flight shows one emotional truth, and Harry's later interviews show another, and Diana's own voice introduces an entirely different perspective, then the public may begin asking a far more dangerous question. Was Harry preserving his mother's legacy, or selectively rebuilding it? That question alone could reshape years of public sympathy. It could change how audiences view the documentaries, how they view the memoir, how they view the interviews, how they view the ongoing tension between Harry and Prince William.
Harry is, of that definition, not a working royal, because he is expecting a recompense into his personal bank account. So you can't, for instance, say that you are being unselfish, but you demand all of the rewards of unselfishness for yourself. That is selfishness.
And according to Palace insiders, that may explain why every old clip, every archived photograph, every forgotten headline, and every private recording suddenly matters more than ever. Because in royal history, power does not always belong to the person speaking the loudest. Sometimes, power belongs to the record. And right now, according to growing speculation, that record may be preparing to tell a very different story from the one the world has been hearing for the last 5 years. And now, as all of these pieces begin moving toward what could become one of the biggest royal narrative collisions in recent history, one uncomfortable truth is becoming impossible to ignore. This may never have been just about Prince Harry leaving the monarchy. According to royal insiders, this may actually be about something far bigger: legacy, truth, and who gets to control history once the cameras are gone, the interviews are over, and only the permanent record remains. For the last 5 years, Prince Harry has built an identity that millions around the world instantly recognize. The prince who walked away. The son determined not to repeat the tragedy of his mother. The husband who chose family over institution. The father who refused to let history destroy the people he loved. It is a powerful story, an emotional story. And for many viewers, it felt completely authentic because it connected directly to one of the most painful memories in modern royal history: the loss of Diana, Princess of Wales. But now, according to growing palace speculation, that story may be approaching its biggest test yet. Because the permanent record does not negotiate. It does not rebrand. It does not care about public relations. And it certainly does not disappear simply because a narrative evolves. The freedom flight footage still exists. The interviews still exist. The documentaries still exist. The memoir still exists. And in 2027, if reports are accurate, Diana's private recordings will join that same permanent archive, untouched, unmanaged, and impossible to rewrite. And that is exactly why palace insiders believe the next few years could become absolutely critical for how history remembers not only Harry, but the entire post-royal era of the Sussex story. Because if Diana's own voice reveals a woman who is not simply trapped, not simply victimized, but highly strategic, emotionally intelligent, and actively shaping her own path, then millions may begin looking at Harry's story through an entirely different lens. Was he honoring his mother's truth, or honoring the version of her story the world was always most ready to believe? That question alone could reshape years of public sympathy. It could change how people view the Oprah interview, how they view the Netflix series, how they view Spare, and perhaps most importantly, how they view Harry's ongoing conflict with Prince William, a brother who chose duty while Harry chose distance. Because according to royal observers, this is no longer simply a family feud. It is becoming a battle between two completely different visions of legacy. One built on public testimony, the other built on silence, service, and institutional continuity. One telling the world what happened, the other allowing time, archives, and history to speak for themselves. And as more old footage resurfaces, more forgotten interviews return, and more private records move closer to public release, that battle may only become more intense. And perhaps that is the most fascinating part of all. Harry may have believed he was escaping the institution back in 2020. He may have believed the Freedom Flight marked the beginning of a completely new chapter. But according to royal insiders, the institution never stopped recording. Every word, every interview, every contradiction, every moment, patiently waiting for history to decide what stays and what falls apart. So now the question moves to you. Do you believe Prince Harry has been telling his genuine truth all along? Or do you think the permanent record is beginning to reveal a very different story behind closed palace doors? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep royal analysis, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more untold palace stories, hidden royal tensions, and explosive historical revelations, and click the next video on your screen, because what's coming out of the royal archives next could change everything.